Alright guys, moving on to Unit 2 now, and instead of doing one big PowerPoint for all of it, we're going to do it bit by bit, and I'm switching to doing these videos through YouTube because the PowerPoint, the file size was huge, and it took forever to upload and download, I'm sure on your end, so hopefully this is better. If you'd like me to go back to the way, I'll ask on Canvas, just let me know. But I think this would be better. You have these videos and they're always there and you can watch them whenever you want, along with all the other information there on YouTube that I hope you guys are accessing. So we're looking at research methods in this unit. Psychology was born from philosophy, which philosophy is just basically using logic, thinking about things, seeing if they make sense or not, and logic is a good starting place, but it doesn't always get you truth, because there's a lot of truths that we know about in all types of fields of science that don't really make any sense, that aren't logical at all. So with the development of the scientific method, real science was created with, as it said in your book, and it's general knowledge, Sir Francis Bacon is the man most widely heralded with kind of solidifying the scientific method. And so psychology was born with who built that first psychology lab. I go back and look in the last one if you don't know, and make sure you review it. When he said, let's make this a science, and let's not just use logic, let's go through actual scientific method and get real accurate truth to, or at least as close as we can get to it, with this new scientific field. So scientific method, you've used a lot in all your science classes or whatever, so hopefully you're familiar, but it's a step-by-step process. You formulate your question, you create your research method. Hopefully you can do an experiment, because that's, we'll talk about this in the next unit, the only thing that really gives us, or next module I should say, real, real truth, real cause and effect is an actual experiment. But if you can, there's other types of research methods that we'll look at in this module, because sometimes an experiment, especially in psychology, you're dealing with human beings, isn't always applicable. There could be an ethical concern. There's just certain situations which you don't really want to replicate, and so some other research methods that you can put in there as well. Have your experiment, collect your data, analyze it, and then from there, hopefully come up with some conclusions. Now, the big thing with the scientific method, and the only way that something can be considered like real science, is if it is replicatable. If it has been, we've done the same research method, experiment over and over and over and over and over again, and we're getting basically the same results. Okay, now that tells us something. So it's really important. One big field of psychology is research psychology. If you ever want to do that, if you're creating experiments, it's really, really important to create really sound operational definitions. So when you have your theory, you have your, or I should say you have your hypothesis that you're trying to test. You need to make sure that you're very, very specific with the variables that you're using. It's very, very important for people later down the road that they can check and recreate your experiment to see if they get similar results. So operational definition, each study of the description of the parameters, and you need it to be very specific. So the examples at the bottom there, one that like an experiment that really wouldn't be replicatable. So if I just said students score better when tests are given later in the day. Well, like you have the two variables, you have the time of the day and you have the score on the test. Like, well, what does that mean to score better? Like, if they get one question correct more, they scored better. 1 minute later in the day is later in the day. So like, what exactly are you talking about here? Like, So instead, a better hypothesis I could use with more accurate operational definitions, we student improve their scores by an average of 7% when the test is taken at 10 a.m. So, if you make that an experiment, you would do, your control group and your experimental group with your independent variable would be like the time. So I'd give like one group of students a score at like 7 a.m. and then another group of students at 10 a.m. And then if the scores at the 10 a.m. were 7% better than the scores that were taken at the 8 a.m. So that I can test. That's like, okay, I know the specific time the researcher used previously. I know the specific score they're looking for, and that I can actually replicate. So got to make sure your operational definition very, very specific so people know exactly what you are testing for. So we will look at experiments in our next module that hopefully I publish as soon as I can. But other types of research methods that aren't the traditional experiment. So you got a case study. Case study is an in-depth study. So you're looking at a person or a group of people, their past, all this information about them, and just kind of gathering data and seeing like kind of what you can find out from that. Advantages: you get a lot of useful data, and it can lead to important things. It can be a starting point for other avenues of research. Okay, so it can be beneficial. Disadvantages, though, you can be very, very subjective if you're studying someone that you get close to or whatever. It's just general information and doesn't fit every situation. So you may look at one person and they have clinical depression. You're trying to like find the root of that depression, and you see that they had a poor relationship with their father. You might jump to a conclusion that the poor relationship causes, depression in later, but like that doesn't necessarily apply to every single person that has maybe a poor relationship with their parents. So it can be dangerous to jump to conclusions by looking at a case study. Hey, this happened here with this person, that must be universal for all of them. No. What it can be, though, is an interesting point, like, okay, so this person is clinically depressed, they had a bad relationship with their father. I wonder if those two things have first look and see if they have a correlation. And if you can get like multiple people that have similar issues, and then, from there you can continue to do research. That particular one you wouldn't really do an experiment on, because you don't want to set up a situation where people are purposely having bad relationships with their parents. But that's kind of what we have a case study for situations where experiments can't really be done because of ethical concerns and things like that. Surveys are self-reported. Answers from people. Okay, you fill out you ask a couple questions about something, you give it to a bunch of people, and they respond. I know right now in the current situation where the administration is sending surveys to parents and families and stuff, like, hey, this is what we're doing. Does it work for you? Does it not? I'm not privy to exactly what their surveys say, but is there something we could do better? And advantages, it's really quick. You get a large amount of data very, very quickly. You can just do your question, especially now with like Google Forms, send it out to 1,000 people, and they just click, and then you get it all back, and now you have a whole bunch of data. Disadvantages of surveys: information can be really skewed by the wording of the questions. If you ask certain questions in certain ways, it can totally influence how people answer them. So be really careful about the wording of your question, what you're really asking for. Are you clear? And poor sampling. It's like what's the best form of music? Is it rock or is it rap? And then I go to the group of kids over here who clearly love rock music and only ask them. It's like, well, I'm not really getting an accurate representation. If I want to like question all of Mesa High, I go to like one group of people, like, hey, You know, go to the basketball team. What's the best sport? Oh, everyone said basketball. Okay, that must be the best sport in everyone's opinion. So you gotta be really careful about your sampling, the wording of your questions, to make sure the data you're getting is as accurate as possible. Naturalistic observations, trying to just record people's behavior in natural settings, with no interaction. Think of the Bobo, the doll experiment. It's not a total natural setting, I guess, but kind of just watching people do their thing. So advantage of it's effective at observing behavior. Just kind of people watch, go around, what are people doing? Disadvantage is to tell you why they're exhibiting that behavior. So you can see, hey, these people are doing this, but just from naturalistic observation, you can't say, well, why? What's going on behind that? This can be, however, again, a stepping stone to further research methods down the road to try to find those answers if applicable. Correlational studies, correlation and causation. Correlation is the degree by which two variables are related. That doesn't always indicate cause and effect. If you remember that one website, and maybe I'll post it again on Canvas, that had the cool little random stats that clearly aren't causing one another, but they have a weird correlation just out of sheer coincidence. So two things might be correlated, but not necessarily cause and effect. Cross-sectional, people of different ages. So right now, the coronavirus, how does the coronavirus affect people who are 65 to 70, and how does it affect people that are 10 to 15? Taking those two different groups and comparing them against one another versus a longitudinal study, which is you're taking the same person and comparing them over time. So, whatever variable the effect of, stress on a person's life, and I'm just going to ask them a simple survey of how, or maybe the effect of stress on depression, and then ask them how much stress do you feel on a scale of 1 to 10, and then how, do you feel depressed on a scale of 1 to 10, 10 being very depressed, 1 being not. And I gave it to a person when they're 15, I give it to them when they're 20, I give them the test when they're 25 and 30, and as long as I can. Same group of people over a long period of time, which can get you a lot of interesting data. One big disadvantage of a longitudinal study is people have to keep up with it, and people can change. We'll talk about ethics later on. People can change and opt out of an experiment at any time. So you could be hoping to gather 40 years worth of data, and they do it once and yeah, I don't really want to do that again. I was just kind of oh no, I can't get that data I need now. So it relies on people really sticking with the experiment or the research method over a long period of time. So those are our research methods. Next unit next module we'll look at experiments, and as always, let me know if you guys have any questions.